All right, so welcome back. Today we're going to talk about different ways to visualize parts of a whole. So oftentimes when you are putting together some sort of a visualization, what you're going to want to communicate is I have this whole thing and it's broken down into these different categories. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. The data that we're going to work with is the Airbnb New York City data set. And this is a data set that has the host ID, how long they've been a host, a description of the space, the neighborhood, which really is the borough, and then, if it's a property, a whole house, and the room type, zip code, all of this. So there's actually a ton of data here. There's price, there's number of reviews, there's all these things. We are going to focus in really just on the number of listings and where they're located. And we're also going to look at the room type because I don't know about you, but whenever I look for something on Airbnb, I usually care where it's at and what kind of a room it's going to be. And those are the two biggest things. So we're going to start by just looking at a simple pie chart. Now, I know that I've said that pie charts are not ideal, and I would still argue that for showing specific amounts and for precision, they are not ideal. What they are ideal for is here you see that Manhattan is overwhelmingly represented in the Airbnbs. There's most of the Airbnbs in New York City are in Manhattan. Next biggest part is in Brooklyn, Staten Island, and the Bronx. Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island. So you can see a ranking here really well. The way that you get this type of visualization, a pie chart, if you haven't made one yet, is to drag the thing that you want to break down. So in our case, this is neighborhoods. Drag that to color. The number of records is the angle. So it's this angle represents the number of records in Queens. And then if you want labels, you drag the same neighborhood over to the text. Okay, so this tells us something. It gives us a breakdown by neighborhood. Another option is to break it down by neighborhood and by room type. So here what we see is that disproportionately in Manhattan you get a entire apartment, more so than in other places, which might be kind of surprising. In Brooklyn you get a private room far more often. Potentially, people just have an extra bedroom to rent out. And you really don't get a lot of shared rooms in Brooklyn, but you get a ton of them in Queens, disproportionately larger. So again, we're using pie charts, but just breaking them down in a different way. The way that we did this is we just took our pie chart, we duplicated it, took neighborhood off of the label because it shows up too much, and took the room type to the rows, and that's how we broke it apart into 3 pieces. All right, so that's one thing. Another thing we can do is just break it down by room type, not worrying about borough at all. And this gives us one pie chart in 3 pieces. And this shows us overwhelmingly entire homes or apartments are available. Next biggest is the private room. And the shared room is just not that popular at all. It looks like I have something weird going on with my tooltips. Yeah. These are not finalized. Please check your tooltips. Sorry, guys. All right. We could do the same thing with our room type, but I want us to look at something really closely here. So here, rather than breaking down our pie chart by boroughs and then our rows by room type, we've done the exact opposite. We've broken down our pie chart into room types and these into boroughs. Now, I would argue that this actually works less well then this one works. And the reason I would say that is it is really hard to keep in my mind and compare across 5 different categories broken up into different visualizations. And this is a general principle in terms of cognitive load. If you are going to have to break multiple visuals multiple ways, the best way to do it is always going to be to keep the most variables in one unit and then the less variables broken down into the different visuals. What I mean by that is we have 3 variables in our unit, and then we have 5 pie charts. Whereas here, we have 5 variables in our unit and 3 pie charts. And it's much easier to draw a conclusion this way than it is when you're comparing 5 different pie charts. So if you're ever in a situation like this where you're, trying to visualize a 2-way distinction and you want to break it out into these different visuals to compare against each other, make sure that you're putting the burden on the visual rather than the small multiple in this way. This is a general guiding principle. In class, we've looked at the music YouTube plays across the United States, the pink small multiples, which is actually the exact opposite approach, but that works for other reasons, as we've discussed in class. Okay, so this is our pie chart suite. Basically, if you just have 3 variables, it kind of works. Up to 5, you can argue that you can still make these comparisons because the proportions are huge. Here we have 3 pie charts, 5 slices. This does not work. 5 pie charts, 3 slices. Doesn't work. Don't do it. Okay, moving along to our bubble bars. I call these bubble bars because we have room type here in the columns. Our x-axis has the room type, and the rows has the neighborhood. And then each basically cell, we have like Manhattan private room, the bubble tells you how many are there. So it looks like a bar chart, but it's actually a bunch of bubbles in a bar chart. This works because you have this one data set that represents the entire universe, and you're able to show that, the proportion of rooms for those different intersections of variables. And you can pretty easily compare, pretty easily see, that Manhattan is the largest, entire homes in Manhattan is the absolute largest slice, which would have been hard with either of the 2 visualizations. Looking at this again, I'd probably make these bubbles considerably larger so that these smaller ones down here are a little bit easier to see. But that said, the way that we did this was we just made a bubble chart. So we took the number of records, room type was on color, and then you see we have columns and rows, room type and neighborhood, just like with a bar chart. One thing that we did was sorted here and sorted descending basically on the number of records. I did the count distinct of the host ID in order to get it to go Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, Bronx, Staten Island, from most to least in terms of the sum of rooms. One quirk about this that you'll notice is that Brooklyn has more private rooms than Manhattan does, ever so slightly, but we are sorting it by the sum here. This works because it's easy to make comparisons. It also just looks kind of cool, I think. And you're not trying to conflate different visuals and have your reader keep in mind different slices to compare. Okay, so those are bubble bars. Let's move on to the beloved tree map. You guys have done a really great job of using tree maps this semester. Here, again, we have room type and borough. So we have, 15 variables that we're looking at here. And the way that we've represented borough is actually just with text. So we're representing the sum with size, the number of records, and we're representing the room type with color. And each slice represents how many of each type that there are. The problem with this, you might notice, is that these really, really small ones, like the 3 shared rooms in Staten Island, can be kind of hard to see. But ultimately, you should know that they're there because this obviously represents the entire universe and is proportionally scaled. It works because you can see the relationship between these entire homes compared to everything else. The entire homes is even more than everything else. And that really quickly comes out in a visualization like this. All right, moving along, we'll look at our heat map. Heat maps are cool if you want to communicate very specific numbers. So if what is important in your visualization is not necessarily the proportion, but the exact numbers. And really, this is a text table with color applied to the number of records. So if you just carry neighborhood to the columns, rows to the room type, and number of records to the text, you end up with a text table. And sometimes that is actually the best way to communicate your information because nothing is more precise than using the raw numbers like this. When you're using a text table, you may want to normalize it so that these are percentages rather than numbers. But overall, I think that it does a really great job of highlighting the cell that has the highest number, the next tier, the tier after that, and then everything else. So it's really just a colored text table, but it has a purpose. Okay, we're going to move on again to our stacked bar chart. Here, if you're trying to make really precise comparisons, this is an excellent visualization. It's really just number of records in neighborhood and then carrying the room type over to color. I'm realizing now that this is not at all sorted, so there's a sort button right here in order to make sure that it's descending like this. And it's really easy to see that Manhattan leads the charge with all of the available Airbnbs. All right, moving along. This one I'm a really big fan of. I just think it's super cool because it just looks neat. So here we have a bubble bar chart or multiple scatter chart. And we are looking at each borough separated and then each room type down here. The color is the neighborhood. That may communicate what you want it to. You can also do the color as the room type, which can be kind of a little bit easier to compare. But I actually think it makes it harder to read, even if it's easier to compare. So it, I think, divides up the cells a little bit better to have them in different colors. And what this does really well is shows that, even though Manhattan has so few shared rooms, it still has more than any other borough overall. It also is a really easy way to compare different values across different boroughs, compare different room types pretty easily. All right. So that's kind of the quick overview of what each one of these things do and what they do well. We are going to turn our attention now to making waffle charts. So waffle charts are super cool and super hard to make in Tableau. For the purposes of this tutorial, I highly encourage you to choose a waffle chart as one of the 3 visualizations that you make. because there's no visualization that's going to give you such depth in understanding the relationship between data sets, data, and the visualizations that you can do in Tableau. So we are going to get started with that now. If you haven't heard the term waffle chart before, that's what we're looking at here. So a waffle chart uses squares, usually 100 squares, or circles or any other custom shape, which there's a link in the written descriptions about how to load custom shapes. It's really straightforward. Not going to go there today. So waffle charts color the squares based on some portion in your data. Generally, for Tableau, I find it easiest to make a suite of waffle charts. So I would make one for Brooklyn, one for Queens, one for Manhattan, Staten Island, and the Bronx, right? Like I would make just 5 different waffle charts that you can compare. I'm only going to show you how to make one today because it actually takes a little while. You can also make waffle charts that are broken down into multiple levels. So here we have the percentage of rentals in Brooklyn, Manhattan, and everywhere else. And this is a little bit more complicated. So we're going to get started with this one. All right. The key to a waffle chart is this like auxiliary table. So you have this on the course website, and this is a table that just has rows, and you'll notice it's 1, 2, all the way down to 10, and then columns, and it goes 1 to 10, 1 to 10, 1 to 10. So we have 1, 1, 1, 2. And what this is saying is that in row 1, column 1, the percentage is 1%. Row 1, column 2, the percentage is 2%, so on and so forth. This is how you're going to build the waffle chart, is you're going to assign this structure, the structure that's like laid out here, and then you're going to fill it based on a value in the other data set. And that value is something that you're going to have to calculate. And then do a unjoined data blend, taking one table and the other table, using them together without ever joining them. So let's look at how you do that. All right. So we come back here, and we're going to go back to our data source. And the first thing that we need to do is create some, well, don't show this. Oh, no, do show that again. Okay. So the first thing you're going to need to do is add a data set here. So go ahead and click on Add in the connections, go to your Microsoft Excel, and then load in the waffle structure or Tableau waffle structure data set. So the waffle structure, you're actually not going to touch it at all, and you can use it for every single waffle chart you ever make. So you just add it in here. Don't drag any of the tables over. Just keep it exactly how it is here. And basically just ignore it, and then go back and click on the Airbnb. All right. So then here in the Airbnb, the first thing that we need to do is calculate each neighborhood independently. So what this means is we're going to make a column for Staten Island, a column for the Bronx, a column for Queens, a column for Manhattan, and a column for Brooklyn. I'm going to illustrate this with Brooklyn, and then you can go ahead and do all of the rest on your own. All right, so you'll go to Neighborhood, and you will select Create Calculated Field, and you'll put into your calculated field if neighborhood equals Brooklyn, in quotes, then the number 1, end. And what we're doing here is we're turning our multinomial classification, our 5-way distinction of boroughs, and turning it into a binomial. Are you Brooklyn? Yes or no. Are you Manhattan? Yes or no. The reason you need the binomial is we're going to have to calculate the percentage of the data set that is Brooklyn, the percentage of the data set that is Staten Island. You can do this all in one equation, but I find it to be much, much easier to visualize each step of that calculation so you have a better handle on it. All right, so go ahead and create a Calc Brooklyn, Calc Manhattan, all of the boroughs. All right, and once you finish with that, come meet us back here. All right, welcome back. So hopefully you have calculated all of your boroughs. The next thing that we're going to do is create another calculated field with the percentage that each borough represents individually. I already have mine done here because it takes a second, but the formula you're going to use is a little bit complicated. You're going to take the sum of the integer of the Calc Brooklyn column. So when we assigned the number 1 to our Calc Brooklyn, we assigned it as a string. So Tableau is like, oh, 1, I know what that is. That's 1. And it's reading it as if it were a word. And you can't really do multiplication or addition on words, so we have to remind it and say, hey, you're not a word, you're a number. So that's what this int is doing, is it's transforming the string column into an integer column. And then we're taking the sum of all of those numbers. So we get however many times Brooklyn appears in our data set, and then we're going to divide it by the count of the host ID. You can also use divided by the number of records. I like to use the unique identifier sometimes because it reminds me that each one of these is a record. So if I count up how many times there is a host ID, then it's the exact same as counting the number of records. To me, it seems a little more obvious using the number of records imputed field might seem more intuitive to you. I'll let you make your decision on what you want to do. This is how I've done it here. Okay, so go ahead now and repeat this calculation for all of the other boroughs. You'll see here I've called it Calc Brooklyn percent. I encourage you to keep the same naming convention because it makes it pretty easy to follow. Okay, great. So go ahead, finish up the other 5 boroughs, and then we'll meet back here. All right, so once you have all of your percentages, we'll go to our new data set. You may get this error already, you may get this error later. It's a warning. What it's saying is that you have 2 unlinked data sets. You're going to need to make a relationship between them. And you're going to say, that's okay, not a problem, don't remind me again, I know what I'm doing. All right. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to add the Waffles data set or the Waffle structure data set to your visualization. It should just be available for you over here in the data pane. You should see sheet 1, Waffle structure. All right. So down here in the measures, you should have row and column. Go ahead and drag your row to your rows and your column to your columns. Seems a little odd, I know. What you're doing is you are creating the waffle. You're creating the grid that you're going to work with. And what you will see is just one big grid like this. We are going to make this in 1 second. All right, so you may need to go up to the analysis menu, which is up here in the very, very header, and unclick aggregated measures. So if it's not looking like this and it's looking kind of different, make sure to go to the analysis menu and click aggregated measures, and then you'll get your grid. Okay. So change your shape to a square and change your size to make it big enough to make it a waffle grid. You can get it pretty big like that. All right, excellent. So now is where it gets a little bit confusing. So here, still in sheet 1, use the drop-down menu to create a calculated field. And this calculated field is going to be your color field. I'm actually going to just open mine up. So you're going to calculate the Brooklyn color, and you're going to take the calc Brooklyn percent from the Airbnb table. If you just start typing calc in the brackets, then it'll auto-populate for you. And you want to find where it is greater than or equal to the sum of the percentage. So this percentage refers to the percentage column in our original tableau or waffle structure data set. All right, so that we have our rows, we have our columns, and then we have our percentage. And everywhere that basically this is an if statement. So what you're saying is that if the Airbnb is greater than or equal to the percentage, return true. If the Airbnb is less than the percentage, return false. So what that means is at 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, it's all true. At 39%, it's false. So you want to color 38 boxes because the first 38 boxes are the first 38%. So what this is saying is everywhere under 38 should be true because this the calc Brooklyn is greater than 1%, 2%, 3%. But then when it starts becoming false, when it's 39, 40, 50%, then you want those columns to be false. Okay, so all we're doing here is creating a Boolean by saying, does this statement evaluate to true or false? Okay, so once you have your Boolean column, what you can do is then drag that over to color, and it will fill in the appropriate number of cells, right? If your cells are looking all kinds of weird, come up to your column and your row and make sure to order them. It's unlikely that they've gotten unordered, but sometimes they do. So all that we've done is we've created this true-false column based on the percentage linked to the percentage from our waffle structure. Okay. Last thing that we did here was we removed all of the axes. So we removed the label, there's no title, removed all the tick marks, formatted the pane here by turning off all of the lines, so there's no lines, renamed the title, removed the bottom axis as well. The last thing that we did was created this annotation. And the way that you do that is you click on a cell, roughly where you want the annotation to go, and you say that you want to annotate an area. And you'll give your annotation saying approximately how much of your area is shaded in, and it'll fill onto the area here. You can make it bigger or smaller, you can make the background pink, you can format it however you want to. So this overall, waffle grids are used a lot, honestly, oftentimes in infographics, because you understand it very, very quickly. And a lot of times in infographics, people use pictures of people to represent how many of something. One thing to be really careful whenever you're using a waffle grid is that you are looking at 100%. So if you're trying to make comparisons again across different data sets, you want to make sure that it is definitely normalized. These are not raw numbers. And I think that can be cognitively a little bit confusing for people since you're looking at distinct units. And just make sure that whenever you are using a waffle grid, you're normalizing it to 100%. All right, so now if you are super curious about how you would use a multinomial waffle grid, because you can't just use this binary true false, let's go over here to the waffle grid that I duplicated. And then I created another calculated column. And let's take a look at that calculation. All right, so I don't advise you to make this kind of a waffle grid, but it's worth taking a look at. All right, so the first statement is just like our statement before. So if the Calc Brooklyn column is greater than the percentage, then don't assign true, but rather assign Brooklyn. Otherwise, if the percentage of Brooklyn plus the percentage of Manhattan is greater than the percentage, and it's less than Calc Brooklyn, then assign it Manhattan. So what this is saying is anything between that's greater than 38%, but less than 52%. And this is how it becomes very, very confusing. Because we're saying, okay, so basically you're going to start counting at 38%, and the number we're looking for is 38% plus 52%. And that's the amount that we're going to shade here. Yeah, I can show you that. Or can I? Not really sure, actually. No, can't really show you that. So we have our 38% here, and then this represents 52%, which is what Manhattan is. If it's not this one or this one, then you can make it other boroughs. You can obviously build this out to cover all 5 boroughs, but here what's most important to show is that Brooklyn and Manhattan make up 90% of the Airbnb rentals in New York City. And that fact alone is really interesting. And this gives you a really good touch point to start talking about why that might be. Why are Brooklyn and Manhattan so dominant? Why is Staten Island and the Bronx so underrepresented in Airbnb? So both the very, very large part and the disproportionately small part give you a good starting place to tell the rest of the story. You know, maybe diving into an analysis of what's going on in Staten Island that causes there to be so few rentals, or what's going on in the Bronx that causes there to be so few rentals, even though there's a lot of really beautiful large homes in the Bronx. Anyhow, all right, so that is it for the parts of a whole tutorial. To complete this tutorial, you need to make 3 of these visualizations by yourself. You can obviously download this workbook from the Tableau Public, and I highly, highly encourage you to have one of those visualizations be this waffle chart. Ideally not of Brooklyn, pick a different borough, right? But going through this process, I think, helps you understand Tableau a little bit deeper. All right. If you have any questions, send me an email, and I look forward to seeing your dashboards. All right, take care. Bye-bye.